One moment. Okay. So for someone who was actually not that much taller than me, Rabbi Dr. Andrea Weiss, who passed away earlier this week, was a giant of the Reform Jewish world. A brilliant scholar and teacher of Bible, she had one of the sharpest minds and largest hearts in our movement. Many of you might actually know her as one of the editors of the Torah, a women's commentary, this large green compilation of female-focused interpretations of the Torah, meaning in this sense the literal 5 books of Moses. That's what's contained in this green book that you might have on your own shelves, and that I recently found out we can actually get in our Judaica store. So she was, as well as a professor, the provost of Hebrew Union College, Jewish Institute of Religion, the alma mater of all of your rabbis and cantors, and even some of our educators. Most at home in the classroom, it wasn't just her intelligent insight into text which enraptured her students. It was her clear passion for them, the way her eyes lit up when she taught, and the way that she wanted to make these texts come alive in our own day and age. She was also, importantly, the first woman in the Reform movement to ordain rabbis. So I'm no political scientist, I'm no MP or military strategist, but I am a rabbi because of Rabbi Weiss. I don't remember what she said to me, but I will always remember the feeling of climbing up those stairs on at Plum Street Temple in Cincinnati to meet her at the Bema. And by extension, I'm able to be here because of her. And so in this heavy week, in the wake of this loss, as well as everything else, the start of this latest round of war with Iran, the shooting at our sister congregation, Temple Emmanuel, and we heard earlier also this morning at Sharei Shemayim, which is close by, and the Bayit up in Vaughan, I couldn't help but to think, what would Andrea say? So this Shabbat, I wanted to draw on some of her wisdom as we try to make sense of this moment and honor Rabbi Weiss's legacy. So why do we do this? Or why might it help, we could ask ourselves? Because in her own words, we study Torah so that we can turn to our sacred texts at times like this, when we and those we serve need guidance, comfort, and support. So I did what felt right to me, which was to pull off my women's commentary from my shelf to soak in of a little bit of the Torah of Andrea regarding this week's parasha, Ki Tisa. So the chapter that we took our verses from was Exodus chapter 32, which, as we heard chanted so beautifully, describes the famous incident of the golden calf. Rabbi Weiss points out the placement of this episode in our Torah and the perhaps ironic link it creates between the building of the Mishkan, which occurs just prior in the chapters before this, and then the construction of the calf. So in both instances, she reminds us that the people are invited to donate their goods willingly, specifically gold. This gold is then used to manufacture a ritual object or a place, and upon its completion, the people offer sacrifices and they celebrate. However, the crucial difference, of course, is that the Mishkan is legitimated by God. It is literally God's dwelling place, while the calf is condemned by the divine as fatally inappropriate. Yet no one understood complexity and no one understood nuance quite like Rabbi Weiss. So she picks up on the word egel, as in egel masecha, translated as a calf, or at other times a young bull or ox, I learned. And she provides some biblical context for how our ancient predecessors may have viewed this idolatrous act. On one hand, historically, sacred objects were constructed, including 2 other calves that we know of, golden calves, one at Bethel and one at Dan. So these sacred objects likely functioned akin to the Ark and the cherubim in the temple in Jerusalem, as thrones or as symbols of God, of the God of Israel who was worshipped at these altars. On the other, the Bible and then later rabbinic texts imagine that these visual representations are idols, that they are worshipped as gods themselves and by their devotees, even if, as in days of old, we mostly understand these images as accessories of a god or a deity, which serve as a means of access to building a relationship with the eternal. It is, as Rabbi Weiss teaches, a mediatory measure, these objects, but this episode highlights just how fine that line is and how challenging these questions of some sort of divine mediation and religious representations are. We might be able to ascribe blame. Rabbi Weiss will comment of how in Exodus chapter 32, verse 1, it's the Israelites who say, "Aseh lanu Elohim, make us a god." This use of plural language, with language being something that Rabbi Weiss, in true rabbinic fashion, loved to pick up on and play with, might imply that it is in fact the Israelites asking Aaron to make them more than one god. Or it could be translated just as validly and could signal that the Israelites were demanding a god rather than the God of Israel. Aaron's response, Rabbi Weiss demonstrates, is complex, as seen in verse 5, which reads, "Vayar Aharon vayaven mizbeach lefanav, vayikra Aharon, vayomer chag l'Adonai machar." When Aaron saw this, he built an altar before it, and Aaron announced, "Tomorrow shall be a festival of Adonai." By constructing the altar, he is inherently guilty by facilitating this forbidden act. However, by declaring it a festival of Adonai, he redirects the Israelites' attention back to the true God, the God of Israel. Subsequently, so perhaps he's trying to correct course in some way. So subsequently, throughout the parashah, the degree of blame fluctuates between Aaron and the people. In verses 2 to 5, which we just heard, Aaron is blamed. But later on, in verses 22 to 24, the people are portrayed as responsible for creating the calf. Rabbi Weiss will then write that some scholars see this contradiction as evidence for two different versions of the same story, one that is pro-Aaron and one that is anti-Aaron. We might also, she notes, read these contradictions as a reflection of the difficulty involved in identifying agency and accountability. In other words, who did what, who has free will, and who is responsible. In the defining feature of this particular commentary, Rabbi Weiss also notes the prominent role of women in this biblical drama. The women, she points out, take off their jewelry, meaning that everybody, not just the men, are implicated in the construction of the calf. The jewelry belonged to them too. Moreover, it is women who, as Moses coming down the mountain and smashes the tablets and sees when he smashes the tablets, are likely the ones who are dancing around the calf. The word in verse 19, which was just after where we left off, this word mecholot, which means dancing, is in the feminine form, as Rabbi Weiss mentions, and therefore likely refers to the women dancing, indicating their participation in this transgression. So, amidst sharing her scholarship on this chapter of our Torah, what do I think that Rabbi Weiss has to teach us about the world today, our world today? The first is that we have much reason to be anxious and even angry, and that might be fair. For ultimately, the calf arose out of fear and anxiety and anger. The Israelites wondered where their leader Moses was, gone for 40 days and 40 nights up this mountain, and worried that they'd been abandoned in the wilderness by him and by the God that Moses had been preaching would protect and guide them. They needed reassurance and confidence in their relationship with God. Had they made the right choice to leave the predictability of Egypt? Were they going to be secure as they ventured into the strange and the unknown, led by a stranger who himself had promised them the promised land? In our own time, we know all too well that same fear and anxiety. War is scary. Bombs indiscriminately targeting your family and friends in Israel is scary. Anti-Semitism is scary. A perpetrator targeting your sister congregations, some closer, some further away, is scary. And it's understandable to feel anxious. Anxious for our family in the bomb shelters, anxious for our friends at our sister congregation. As Rabbi Splansky mentioned, I know that they'll appreciate us reaching out to them after Shabbat. Anxious about our own vulnerability in our own synagogue, in our own neighborhood. It's also understandable to be angry that we, whether here at home or in our homeland in Israel, have to live this way at all. Not just in the last 2 years or so, but I would posit even before that too, though that's a sermon or a thought for another time. Number 2, that we can hold nuance and complexity, but our moral compass should, at some junction, point us to clarity. Put simply, sometimes there's a right and a wrong. We can see the logic, we can feel the emotion, but at the end of the day, building the calf was wrong, no matter who's to blame. A regime of terror in Iran is wrong, as we heard those meaningful words from Kathy just moments ago. Indiscriminately targeting innocent civilians is wrong. Shooting at a synagogue is wrong. And sometimes there's black and white, and I don't just mean the letters on this parchment of the Torah. That we are, number 3, now and always, obligated to stand on the moral high ground. For Rabbi Weiss, this incident of the golden calf was not merely about ascribing blame for idolatry. It was about a fundamental rift in the covenantal relationship between God and the Jewish people, and the need to bridge the gap that was created to repair that most sacred of relationships. In restoring that covenant, as happens at the end of the parasha, so it's okay, there's some light at the end of the tunnel, we are able to make something wrong more right and more whole once more. For us, Rabbi Weiss's wisdom implores us to remember that whilst we cannot control our circumstances, at least not entirely, we can control our responses. As a result, I believe that she would want us to take Torah's deepest lessons and use them to live up to our full potential, to fight for justice, to free the oppressed, to face our broken world with the same compassion and openness that she did, and to bring our gifts to build a better, brighter future. So as we conclude, it seems weirdly fitting that Rabbi Weiss would have died this week, right between Purim, a Jewish festival in which we center a female heroine, Esther, and tomorrow, March 8th, which is actually International Women's Day. So as we seek guidance and comfort and support at this confluence of the Jewish calendar and current events and the Torah of Rabbi Weiss, may we take these words of her to heart. Be courageous, be kind, be hopeful about your ability to bring about a better world. Shabbat Shalom.